Welcome to Across the Pond, the podcast where I, Daniel, speak with people from around the world. Some of them are actually across the pond. As you can tell, I have an American accent. I live in Seattle, so sometimes I speak with people from Europe or Asia. But today is not one of those days. I get to speak with Kurt, but this is the podcast, like I said, where I talk to random people from around the world. And around the world, I mean around the world. Literally anywhere. I've spoken with people from Australia before, New Zealand. I've spoken to people from all over the United States. I want to say I've had a Canadian or two before. People from all over Europe. I want to try and speak with everyone from every country around the world. So if anyone knows of any North Korean defectors that speak English, dude, send them my way. I would love to speak with them. I have questions about Kim Jong-un. Bruh, I want to learn about North Korea more. I think it's an interesting country, I'll say that. But in this episode, Kurt and I speak about religion, about Christianity. We speak the entire episode about that. We learn a little bit about Kurt, about kind of where he came from. There's a few bleeps just for sake of anonymity, I think is the right term. I don't even know if that's necessarily the right term. But I just bleep out the town that he's at and the church that he goes to. So, it's not one of those weird stalkerish things, people get weird. But yeah, we speak about a lot of religious stuff. I would encourage you to listen to it. We don't force anything down anyone's throat. We don't say it's this way or the highway. We don't do any of that. We just talk about some of the current situations that pastors and church leaders go through. Some of the things that are happening right now with COVID. I'd encourage you to give it a listen.
Hello.
Hey there, how are you?
I'm doing all right. Yourself?
I'm doing well, thanks. How was your day?
It has been a full Sunday. I think I got up around 5:36 a.m. today. So,
Oh shoot.
I'm good.
Do you have like early church or something?
Today was an extra. I was helping serve communion today for the first time, so that was extra early. So little earlier than normal, but no, I'm feeling pretty good given the amount of sleep that I had, and
Nice.
doing the do right now. So I got the sugar and caffeine coming in, so I should be good for the length of this discussion.
Nah, dude, it'll be good. I'm kind of curious. What church do you go to?
So I won't say it. We're not recording, right? So I just offline, I'll say I go to.
Okay.
So I don't know if you've ever been over this way, but it is a small, the most rural town that I've ever lived in. So it's quite I've been here 3 weeks now.
Mm-hmm.
So I had lived near, and I went to or worked at previously.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've had 9 years in between in Michigan. I went back home to where my family is, and then came back out here just 3 weeks ago. So
Gotcha.
This is a new adventure.
Yeah, it sounds like it. By the way, I am recording, but I'll edit all of that out, so don't worry about it.
Oh,
No worries. Yeah, so what I do is I click record, and then I admit you into the room, and then it just kind of goes from there. But just so you know, I am recording, but I'll go through and I'll bleep all that out, so none of it is leaked.
Yeah, I don't know. When I've done these over Zoom, I typically, will say we're starting the podcast or whatever. So I didn't realize that. But yeah,
it's my fault. I've always just kind of hit record, and then just from the very beginning, like, hey, how are you doing? I just try to keep that more casual kind of conversation going, rather than like, oh,
Gotcha.
is it started? Oh, so you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Kind of the whole emphasis behind it, but that's nice. So how long have you been at the church, at the one that you're at now?
So I've been at this church 3 weeks, so very fresh and new, still getting to know names and getting to know people in the community. It's a pretty rural town, smaller than I grew up in suburban Detroit. And so suburban community is what I'm used to. So this is a little bit of a stretch, but it's a good thing. It's an adventure.
Yeah, I went to a school at Corbin.
Okay.
Just I think it's south-ish of you, where your church is located, and I had a buddy that I actually lived with for a while who worked out there. I don't know what he did, but he had some sort of logging thing. I don't know, but he said that it was like at least from where I was, close to like 45 minutes to an hour away from Salem. I was like, shoot, man, like you go out there for work. And so I'm somewhat familiar with the area, just a
Okay.
little bit. I know Woodburn, that's probably the farthest out that way, or farthest that way that I've been. But I've been to like Detroit and stuff, Detroit
Okay.
Lake and all that. So I know the area out there, and I've been to Sisters and everything. So I'm a tad familiar. But when it comes to northern Salem up to Portland, I've only driven I-5, and so I don't know much east or west of there.
Gotcha. And you're from up in Washington, right?
Yeah, I'm in Seattle right now.
Okay.
Yeah. I actually went to, so when I was at Corbin, there's this girl that was kind of in our friend group, and she suggested that a buddy and I, because we didn't know where we were going to go to church. We just knew that like we needed to find one, like we wanted to, but we weren't sure like which one to go to, because you have Church on the Hill, which is eventually where I ended up going. But then you have like Forest Square, and you have all these other churches in Salem. But she suggested to go to Bridgetown for a while. Are you familiar?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and so I for a while I went to Bridgetown. I was baptized there and everything, and I really like John Mark Comer and just his teaching and how he's so intelligent, and his words just kind of make me feel uneducated the way that he speaks. But I like his way of being able to convey everything. It's just a nice way of teaching, I guess, rather than the whole Jesus loves you, and that's all they say. He's very
Right.
contextual, and it might be hard to understand at first, but the longer you go, the more you feel like you learn with him. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, he definitely has an academic way of teaching. And funny story. So back when I was a youth pastor at Sunset Pres on the west side of Portland back in the 2000s.
Hmm.
And so I kind of had a love-hate relationship with his church, mainly because, I was attending or, youth pastoring at a church that was a large Presbyterian church. And like typical denominational churches, they were bleeding their college age students were all going to the Way, which I don't know if you're familiar with that,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that was, yeah. So John Mark's dad was the pastor of the church at the time, and he let him basically create and run his own college group, which really had this momentum to it. And it just kept busting, every time they had a room, it busted out. They had, ran out of space. And so I went there, and so it was one of those things, I hated it because it was stealing all of our college age kids, which for me mattered because they were the best volunteers. They were the
Hmm.
volunteers that you wanted in the church to work with the youth, but they were all going down there, and eventually they would end up leaving the church. And then I went down there and checked it out myself, and drank the Kool-Aid and appreciated and
Hmm.
saw all the cool stuff that they were doing. So yeah, so I like to say I was into John Mark and that church before it was cool, before it was trendy and everybody was doing it. Like
Yeah.
it was on the growth curve when I was there.
Yeah, it's one of those churches to where I haven't really found one like it, but I mean it is
Mhm.
very, like, the aesthetic and everything is cool, because I can't remember exactly what it is, but the old building that they're in, wasn't it like an old Baptist building or something like that? I can't remember.
The when I was there, it was in an industrial park.
Oh
So
shoot.
it was down in Tigard, and it was just like you drove into this remote, like, office park, which was empty on the weekends.
Hmm.
And they just refabbed this, office building complex into a church. So that was again later when they started getting into downtown. And I think seeing their model, for lack of better terms, started going in that direction of being kind of that aesthetic, that vibe, if you will. They wanted kind of that old building look,
Hmm.
and to be fair, they wanted to be centrally located in Portland when they launched that campus. But that's really the extent of it. Other than knowing a lot of people who are connected to that church, I just attended for a few years when it was the Way.
Gotcha. So I'm kind of curious, if you don't mind me asking, so you said that you were out in Detroit, as in like Michigan?
Yes, so that's where I grew up. I grew up in suburban Detroit.
Okay, so you grew up there and then you
Hmm.
ended out here. How
Yep.
did that work?
Good question. So I was 24 and I had been working as a youth pastor part-time, part-time paid, and I got a degree in college, Bible college, to be a youth pastor. And so I started looking for my first full-time gig, like to actually make money doing youth ministry. And
Mm-hmm.
I was looking regionally, so I wanted to be within driving distance of home, mom and my nieces and my sister and family and stuff at the time. And so I just went to these job bank, just like every job, they had job banks for youth pastors. And I
Mm-hmm.
went online and you'd click on region. So I clicked the Midwest. And anyways, after about a month of doing that, one afternoon, I was just sitting at a coffee house stealing the internet there. And I was thinking, if I was going to live somewhere other than Michigan, I'd always kind of dreamed, gosh, probably going back to when I was 12 years old, to living in Oregon. And so I searched on the Pacific Northwest, and the top listing that day was middle school pastor, Sunset Presbyterian. And I was like, instantly like, okay, that's either like God directing me or that's
Mm-hmm.
just some weird coincidence, because middle school pastor roles are very how do you say, like, there's not very many of them.
Yeah.
So like the fact that I saw that one and it was where I wanted to go was really great. And so I called them up and sent my resume over, and the rest is kind of history. It just felt like a glove. Every conversation was very easy going. I was what they were looking for, they were what I was looking for, and it just was a real good fit. So that was that's what ultimately led me to take that big move in 2004 and get in my Chevy Blazer with my dad, and we just drove out from Michigan to Oregon. That was quite the trip. Easily the biggest change in my life
Oh, yeah.
up until that point.
Yeah, that's kind of so. So before I ask anything else, why Oregon? Like at a young age, you said you wanted to move to Oregon. I mean, to be fair, it's a beautiful state, but why
Yeah.
Oregon?
So you're going to laugh, and it's okay because there is some comedic element to this, but it is a weird mixture of, so we can go back to, like, how when you're in elementary school and the teacher will like do that typical young kid thing where they're like, where do you see yourself after graduation? So
Mm-hmm.
I think I might have been in 5th grade, 6th grade. And so I wrote up this thing and I said, I wanted to be an airline pilot living in Oregon and have a wife and kids and whatever, And so that was like the earliest recorded, desire, if you will, of living in Oregon. But as I got older into my teen years, I really connected with the movie The Goonies and then Kindergarten Cop. And I noticed in both of those movies, kind of the rainy, foggy coastal area, the Cannon Beach, and that Haystack Rock, and just, that whole, there was something that drew me to that area. And so when I was 16, my mom and I flew out here and we visited Astoria and we visited Portland and actually drove up to Seattle to meet my grandfather up there. And so, so I would say kind of all those things together led this little desire to be in this part. And then to your point, once you come here, once I was 16 on the ground, I mean, it's like I was the kid saying I would never leave Michigan. Michigan's the most beautiful state in the country. And it's like everybody now who says that, who are my friends in Michigan, I'm like, well, where have you traveled? Right? Like
Yeah.
it's always easy to say your state's the most beautiful, but if you haven't traveled much, you might as well, shut up, because it's until you visit these other places that you really can compare and contrast, things like natural beauty and stuff.
Yeah, and to your point, I lived in Montana for a while, and if you like mountains, man, the Rocky Mountains are something else. If you hit Grand Teton National Park, oh my goodness, there's just something beautiful about those mountains that just, goodness, man, like it's something. But it's kind of funny that you say Oregon, just because it's like it's just one of those states that's just kind of there. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people want to either go to California, they want to go to New York City, they want to go to Seattle. You don't hear a lot of students or a lot of, younger people saying, oh, I want to go to Oregon. But I mean, to be fair, it is a beautiful state. So maybe you just had the idea of, Oregon's beautiful. Portland's cool. You have the coast, and the coast of Oregon is just something to behold because it's so beautiful, especially when it's foggy out. You have whale migration and stuff if you're lucky during like September, beginning of September, end of August. You can see the whale
Yeah.
migration and everything, which I have been blessed with, which is really cool. I suggest you do it if you haven't. But
Hmm.
there's just so many amazing parts of it. You have dense forests, you have rain, you have fog, you have beautiful cities, you have beautiful coastlines, you have beautiful farm areas. Like whatever it is, like Oregon's got it, except mountains. I will say that Oregon has very few mountains, unless if you count like the Sisters and stuff.
Hmm.
Um, what I can't remember what they're called, but I think it's the Sisters. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I believe so as well.
yeah.
Yeah, and
It's
to your point,
beautiful.
I think if you're coming from Michigan, which the biggest hill near my former home was a landfill, so it's
Oh,
like Oregon's hills to me are mountains. The place I'm living now, I mean, there's definitely what I would call mountains, but I guess if
hmm
you get technical, it's not Mount Hood or the
yeah,
Sisters. It's not a technical mountain, but from Michigan to here, it's like no, I can see something above the streetlights. Like there's
hmm
actually something to look at back there. So I definitely love the environment out here. I
oh
just
yeah,
feel like the air is fresher.
hmm
There's just things again that when you're in a new place or a different place, I love hiking. I love getting out in the woods on the weekend and just
yeah.
clearing your mind, and your soul just tends to just replenish and get renewed out there. So I love
Yeah.
that.
Are you able to see Mount Hood on a clear day from where you're at?
No,
Ah,
no, I'm too far south for that.
gotcha. Okay, I was just kind of curious because I know that there were some days when I would be driving to Corbin. There's I think now there's like an Amazon facility blocking the way, but
Hmm.
there was a stoplight and then the school, and there was like this, I don't know, maybe half a mile drive of land to the school grounds. And as you were driving that, it was just like open fields and stuff. And on a clear day, you can look and see Mountain Hood all the way down there, however many 60, 70, 80 miles or whatever it was off in the distance. It was just so beautiful. I do miss
Nice.
that. I do miss that. Um, so kind of, because I'm curious, because like when I went to Corbin, I got a religious leadership degree, and of course that's not just something that you decide to go with on the fly. Like ministry is definitely it's definitely a hard career path to go down in terms of just like even deciding that you want to do that, because there's so much weight to it. There's a lot of stuff. It's a very yeah, you have to be called. Like I don't know how you
Hmm.
feel about that word, but I feel like that's probably the best word to use. You definitely have to be called to do it because of how hard it is. What kind of started you down that path to where you decided that you wanted to go into ministry, especially youth ministry?
Yeah, so I'll jump to that story, but I'll just preface kind of sound off to what you were saying with I agree that people are called to ministry, and I also my philosophy is that ministry is, this goes back to the church fathers, but ministry is a burden, not something that is like this, glorified like I'm this person and I feel like I've got to go use my gifts or whatever. I feel like it's something that sought me out more than I pursued it, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
it would be wrong of me not to continue in the ministry path. It wasn't something that I necessarily was running hard after. And even in my, last 5 years, it was, that I went through the typical, well, maybe I'm not going to do ministry anymore. Let's start looking at, getting a normal job or a different job, because of some of what you're saying. It is uniquely hard. You're always on the job. You're never really technically off.
hmm
And there's tons of expectations, and you're put in all these weird pickles between different groups of people, and expectations on youth pastors are especially high to perform and to have numbers and to please the church kids and the non-church kids and the pastors kids, and
Yeah.
so but getting back to your question, what started me down that path is when I was 16, I had started attending a church that was kind of the large up and coming hip church in Michigan. But I was, again, it's ironic to our conversation about Bridgetown, because I was in the beginning of that. It wasn't as if I knew it was going to be this big thing. I started attending because a girl in my lit class, I went to a public school. I came from a non-Christian home, and I was in a lit class and this girl was arguing the Bible with some guys. They were like basically being antagonistic to her, something related to literature in the Bible. And I found myself arguing with her. Like I didn't really know her, but I kind of got in on the conversation. And so at the end of class, she's like, "Hey, you should come and check out my church. They're moving to a new location. It'd be a great Sunday to check it out." And I think I kind of blew her off, like, yeah, maybe, whatever. But once I left class and as time went on, I just felt this little prompting and nudge, like, no, you need to be there. Like, you need to go. And I had not been attending church at that point for about 2 years. I'd kind of just got tired of I went to my grandma's church growing up. It was an old school Baptist church. Oof. And it was very fundamental, King James only. I just, when you go to public school, the gap was getting larger and larger between reality and this church I went to. So I'd given up and went through 2 years of kind of a desert period. But this conversation ended up becoming pivotal because I not only started attending that next Sunday, but it ended up being the church that I was baptized in. I went on a missions trip. I became a member, started serving in the middle school ministry. And again, the rest is kind of history. It just fit is the best way to put it. It just like, I knew that some of the gifts that were inside of me were now coming out of connecting with students and being relational with them and nudging them on their journey towards God. So yeah, not having any younger siblings, I had never grown up with. I thought kids were just annoying, like, get out of here, I don't need you, Yeah. But once I was in the ministry and seeing how fun it could be and how influential adults could be, specifically on middle school age students, it's very fulfilling. And so that kind of set me. So I was going to college at Eastern Michigan, and Eastern Michigan's like 23,000 students. And I was going for like social work psychology. And then halfway through, I switched majors and went to a small Christian college of, I believe, 600 to 700 total students.
Wow.
So you talk about a major shift right in the middle of college, going from this mega school, which is godless and, no respect for Christianity, to this ultra, conservative Christian college that was like the other end of the spectrum, like too far in the other direction. So it was quite the college experience. But looking back, I feel like it was very formative. It was good that I had those classes at Eastern in social work and psychology. That was actually forming a foundation that I wouldn't have got if I just went to that small Christian college. So
yeah, man, that sounds like a journey. It kind of sounds like the same journey I went through, if I'm being honest with you. To give you a bit of background about me, I was raised in a Christian home, except my father was very legalistic. He grew up just very lost and didn't know what he was doing. Like he hid so much from me that I didn't know about until I started living with my uncle for a little bit, which is a different story, but nothing bad. It's just a choice that I made. And so, when my father, came to the Lord and everything, which I don't know when it was before I was born, he was just very convicted, and he had the mindset of, you just got to do the right thing. You have to do the right thing. You can't lie, you can't do this, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, of course you can't do that. But, being so young and having that influence, I was very legalistic. It was just like, I have to do it. I have to do it. I have to do it. And it's like, no, you can't, you can do good and stuff, and like, you have that ability to do good, but like you can only do so much as a person, a sinful person. And so for the longest time, we went to this really small home church that I absolutely hated because the pastor was hellfire and brimstone. Like there are some things that he said that just, it burned me the wrong way, to the point where I was like, I don't want to deal with Christianity anymore. And it's not necessarily, I don't want to deal with Christianity. Let me rephrase that. He burned me so bad that I had the mindset of, I don't want to deal with religion, because I know for a fact that religion is not this hellfire, brimstone, you're going to hell if you do something wrong, you have to live the best you can be. I knew there was something wrong with that. And so it wasn't until I moved out of the house and, graduated high school and decided, that I wanted to go to college, and started living with my uncle because I just needed to get away from Montana, where I was at the time, for personal reasons, nothing with my dad or anything. It's just, there's some really bad personal things that went down. that just really, really hurt me. And so I needed to leave. And when I went to my uncle's place, that's when I really started to, develop that idea, like I want to try and give this religion thing a chance again. And then I decided to go to Corbin. And then when I was at Corbin, there was always something, even when I was younger, that just made me feel like I needed to go in the ministry, and I can't explain it other than that. There are just so many times where it was like, I don't want to, but I feel like I have to. There was always that thing that just kept coming up every year, every 6 months, whatever it was. You should go into ministry. You should go into ministry. You should do this. You should do that. Go into ministry. And I don't know what it was. I don't know why it was there. I don't know. I don't know what it was. I mean, now I know what it was, but at the time I was just like, why do I keep feeling this nagging urge to go into ministry? Like I don't want to, but I feel like I almost have to. Like there's like I'm a big believer in the fact that, like, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, what God's calling you to do, he's going to get you onto the right path. And so I just felt like that's kind of what it was. And so, long story short, I went to Corbin, got my religious leadership degree, but it's the same idea. I feel like my life is kind of like yours in terms of, like, you grew up in the church, you grew up in your grandmother's church, but it sounded just very, separated from everything. It just didn't seem like the right place. I grew up in legalistic church. And so it's interesting how yours and I's story it's gone the same way for the most part. And, it's kind of encouraging to hear that, so that I don't feel like I'm the only one that's going down this path, even though I know that I'm not. It's just having that validation sometimes is encouraging.
For sure.
Yeah. So what do you want to do in the next, say, like 10 years with ministry? Do you want to stay with youth, or do you want to go forward to teach, like high school age or college age, or do you maybe eventually want to become like senior pastor?
Definitely not senior pastor. I made a decision many years ago internally that, I've had a front row seat to 3 different senior pastors, and I respect them greatly. What they have to deal with is next level. And I don't know. I don't think it's insecurity. I think it's just a sense of my gift mix, and knowing that the 2 things they deal with that I don't want anything to do with, or little to do with, is money and politics. And
Yeah.
I just feel like senior guys they have to be in those 2 mindsets, unfortunately. And I feel like it so easily muddies their relationship with the congregation when you start dealing with people who give more than other people, and people who have opinions that shape,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just felt like that I had enough bad experiences in watching those sort of things that I just, no, I don't want to be that guy. And it's back to what I'm saying of, I'm the reluctant minister, right? Because there's a humility and a sense of, like, I'm not good enough to be a pastor. I don't like being put up on a pedestal and, like, people see me as like, oh, he's that guy. It's like, no, I'm not. Like, I look in the mirror every day at a guy who's struggling, and I have, internal stuff going on that's not always out there. And so I think that's part of it too, is like, I feel like the higher up the food chain, the org chart you go, like, I don't know, but that's part of that hesitation. So where do I see myself? I'm really in a season, again, partly because of COVID and just the way my life has gone in the last 5 years, that, I used to be, I'm a 1 on the Enneagram. I don't know if you're big into the Enneagram.
I've taken it multiple times, but I can't remember what it's about.
Okay. So what ones on the Enneagram are big, black and white, very planned, structured, strategy focused. And so, if you had met me, 10 years ago, I always had a vision for the year. I always had 5 goals I was working towards, like, personally, not like in my job.
Yeah.
And now I don't do that anymore, because it's just that thing again, where life is so fluid and things turn and change and morph. And it's that old joke that, I threw out my 5-year plan 5 years ago. It's like, it never seems to line up with reality. And so, I mean, I just returned to youth ministry after being out for 4 years. I don't have any reservation telling you that I was fired from my last youth job.
Oh, wow.
It was a messy environment. I was the longest running and most educated youth pastor in the church's 14-year history. So they typically had the 1 to 2 year youth pastor, just totally cycling through them. And not going into great detail, but just to, put it plainly, is the pastor was highly focused on numbers and performance. It was all the big, the big performance based, pastors on staff were held to these unrealistic goals. And so for me, the carrot over my head from pretty much day one was, we want 100 students here. And I was like the naive guy who came in and is like, I'll get you to 100. And so I tried everything I could. And the irony is that in the 4 years I was there, it did grow. In fact, our middle school ministry doubled in size while I was there, and we were consistent. I'm not the guy throwing this out as like, oh, one Sunday we hit it. No, we held those numbers, but we never got to the magic number. We never got to where he would see me as successful. And so, there was a rough period in the last year where I put forth what I felt was a reasonable report of like, here's what I need to get to 100. It's the chicken and the egg thing. You're asking me to be the one paid staff person on staff to make this happen, but I feel like I need these other things. And they just said, well, we can't do that. So it was, then a conversation of, well, it's probably time to move on. So that was the beginning of that season of like, okay, maybe I don't want to do ministry anymore. If church looks like this, I don't want anything to do with it,
Yeah, it's really sad to hear stories like that. I'm not sure if you're familiar when I say the name, but Sam Baker.
No.
He's one of the head theology professors at Corbin. He's very, very smart. He's one of those youth pastors that's like rather well known, at least in California and in some of the Pacific Northwest. I'd encourage you to look him up just because he's a very knowledgeable man. But he would tell me horror stories of stuff like that, of some of the churches that he served in. There was one to pretty much the same thing that happened to you. He was an associate pastor, and he comes in and the pastor was telling him, hey, you have to make sure that you hit these numbers because numbers are what drive churches. And Sam, my professor, was just like, I mean, you're not wrong, but you're wrong. Like, you're not wrong in the sense that like you do need numbers because, you need different amounts of tithes, you need different amounts of offerings, all this stuff, because of course the only way that churches make money is by donations. And so, the more people you have, the more money you theoretically will get. So that makes sense, right? And then he starts to go on about how it's wrong because here's the thing. If you do everything to get even just one person to come to Christ, then that should be worth everything that you've done, And that's where a lot of people fall. And my professor was then telling us, he started going into a few more stories about, just that. But he wanted to, of course, reiterate in the fact that, like, the reason that you should be doing ministry is because there could be just that one person that, you help come to Christ. It could just literally be one person out of your entire teaching career. And he's like, well, I hope it's more than that, and made a joke out of it. But it's the idea that, even if you're used for just one person, then like you've done more than, the world because you changed that person's life. And there's no telling what that one person can do. So I hate hearing how churches are so number focused just because while they're not wrong, they're wrong. Just because, you need to have the right mindset going into it. Like, yeah, you might want to try and save, let's just say 20 kids a year or whatever it is, like, yeah, that might be a little feasible, but you also have to understand the fact that, the youth minister needs resources. He needs time. He needs people. He needs your help as the senior pastor, as the, pastors that are above the youth pastor. Like, he needs help to do all that. And if you're not able to then give him the stuff, the resources that he needs, the time, whatever it is that he needs, then you're asking for unrealistic expectations. You also should just be kind of trying to focus on doing the best that you can, because here's the thing. It's almost kind of like with, I don't like comparing social media or YouTube or anything like that to the church, but in the same kind of generalized idea, if I was to start a YouTube channel, I was pumping out just crap videos, I'm not going to get people to follow me. But if I start posting videos that are actually good about whatever it is, then more people are going to come and more people are going to come. That's kind of like what the church needs to do. You got to actually give them something that they can, enjoy, something that they feel like they can relate to, whatever it is. You need to be able to put that up, to put that out there so then you can attract more people. But they don't see it like that. Some people don't see it like that. They just see it as numbers. and it
Right.
doesn't make sense. I feel like it's almost like a bad way to do religion, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, I've used a similar analogy or metaphor of, Apple computers. It's like, if a company starts tomorrow and they say, we're going to make tons of money, we want to make lots of money, that's not going to be a good company. The
Mm-hmm.
reason why companies like Apple are now $1 trillion in the bank is
Mm-hmm.
because they set out to create an excellent computer, an excellent end user experience. They saw a problem, and like any good company, they created a product that solves the problem. They made computers easier for the average person to use. And then over the years, they continued to innovate and keep their eye focused on pretty much a small, I mean, they've kind of varied from this in the last 5 years, but they really focused on a narrow like niche. Like, we're just going to do four things and we're going to do those really well. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that, again, it's true what you're saying, that the church is an organism or an organization more than a business. But if you are going to use the business principles, you also have to play out that what we're saying, which is, if you set out just to make money, you're not going to be a good company. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think churches, again, can easily get into this, focused on being a massive church, and they miss the forest, the tree for the forest, or however that goes. And so
Yeah.
I also thought of a quote here. I just looked it up from Eugene Peterson. I love Eugene
Mm-hmm.
Peterson. I
He's
think that
good.
guy's a super stud. And he was quoted in saying, he says, the pastors of America have metamorphosized into a company of shopkeepers, and the shops they keep are churches. They are preoccupied with shopkeepers' concerns: how to keep customers happy, how to lure customers away from competitors down the street, how to package the goods so that the customers will lay out more money. Some of them are very good shopkeepers. They attract a lot of customers, pull in great sums of money, develop splendid reputations. Yet it's still shopkeeping, religious shopkeeping, to be sure, but shopkeeping all the same. The marketing strategies of the fast food franchise occupy the waking minds of these entrepreneurs. While asleep, they dream of the kind of success that they will get the attention of journalists.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It what and I'll say it like this. I've when I was at school and stuff, um my professor, he would tell us that like you almost have to run the church like a business. You want to, in the sense that the, the senior pastor and the head pastor and the pastors are able to look at it, and they're able to, I don't want to say make it a business, but you kind of have to, in the sense that, you have to have structure. You have to make sure, that you have a business plan, if you will. You kind of have to lay stuff out as, the money comes in and the numbers come in, but you can't look at it like that, because then it becomes a business. Does that make sense?
mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's just like, it I hate to see the churches that just business, business, business. We want money, we want people, we want to look good. Because then, if that's all you focus on, then you miss the whole idea of, the church. You miss the whole idea of the Bible. You miss the whole idea of Jesus. Because it's not, you as a pastor, you're supposed to go and you're supposed to preach the word. That's your job. You're supposed to go and make disciples. I mean, I guess that's everyone's job, as a Christian, but we're supposed to go out into the world and we're supposed to make disciples. The Bible doesn't necessarily tell us how to do that. Like, ministry is rather open in terms of how we should do it. Jesus didn't go out and say, with youth ministry, you have to play video games for 5 minutes and then you have to eat. He never said any of
Mm-hmm.
that. He said, just go out and make disciples. And so, of course, that differs from person to person with how you should do it, based on your demographics, based on where you live, based on, all these other factors. But at the core of your being, the core of the church, it should be, you should go out and make disciples. It shouldn't be something where you have to hit a certain amount of numbers, because then you're missing the point. You're not making disciples. You're worried too much about a name. You're worried too much about a signature. You're worried too much about something that doesn't matter, in terms of you're missing, in terms of like, you need to get the person rather than just a number. And so it's, and I don't want to keep saying it's sad, but it's true, because you see so many churches do it. They just worry so much about that number. They worry so much about that person, but it's not the person, it's what they bring. They miss the whole idea of just go out and make disciples.
Right. Yeah, and like my pastor in Michigan always said, Jesus said, "I will build my church." The
Yep.
the heavy lifting, the point of Jesus being the head of the church is that's ultimately on him, right? Like we play important roles as people, vocational people who work at churches and get paid through tithes. Not diminishing those roles, but the heavy lifting, the spiritual side of it, of him bringing people to the church and people feeling a nudge and that motivation internally, that's on Jesus. That's
Yep.
us trusting the Holy Spirit. He's going to build the church.
Yep.
And so I think it's a much different thing when you're the senior guy and you're losing sleep because, oh my gosh, 15 people left the church.
Yeah.
Like, you shouldn't feel that weight on your shoulders, but you also shouldn't be an idiot. You shouldn't
Oh
be
yeah.
up there, doing whatever. You should do your best. And it's not one or the other. It's both. And, we work hard and we're faithful and we live a certain kind of lifestyle, but it's not like you get fired if you don't equal, this percentage growth in the last year. Like, that's when it crosses a line into, it's my fault that these kids aren't showing up to my event. Like, come on, there's a lot of other forces in the world of a teenager that's preventing them from getting here. Not just, oh, they don't like the youth pastor.
Yeah. And I mean, to be fair, like, just by talking with you, you seem very knowledgeable. You seem like a really cool guy, so it would be stupid to fire you. But, there are, of course, those pastors that just suck eggs. Like, there are some that get hired and you're like, what the heck? Like, how are you a pastor? Like, you're stupid. Get off. But then you have those people who are really solid. It's just, for whatever reason, they just can't do it. And not to say that it's their fault, but you hinted at it. There's so many different factors that come into play. Coronavirus, of course, is a huge play right now. Like, I don't even think most youth groups are meeting. You have movies, you have social media, you have video games, you have just like even small things that people might not think about are big factors to these kids, to where it's like, why would I go, talk and learn about Jesus for an hour or go play games for an hour when I could sit here on my butt and play Halo or whatever it is, or play Grand Theft Auto or whatever it is, Destiny. I'm really in Destiny right now, so Destiny's on my brain. But you have all of these, different factors that come into play. And I feel like you hit the nail on the head when you said that, like, pastors, actually, let me go back a little bit more. When you said, we have to trust in the Holy Spirit to like build his church. Like, here's the thing. We are merely just messengers, like, we're supposed to go and spread the good news of Jesus, like, that doesn't mean that we have to convert someone. And I feel like a lot of people mistake that. Like, we are supposed to go out and share the news. After we do that, we've done our part. Then we have to wait on Jesus to do the rest of it. Like, we can't, like, we can lead a horse to water, but we can't make it drink. And that's the whole idea of this. Is like, for example, hey Kurt, how you doing? My name's Daniel. I want to tell you about Jesus. And you're like, nah, dude, like, I'm good. That doesn't mean that, of course, I give up. Like, I got to find different ways to maybe try and do that, whether that be, just becoming friends and you seeing, like, how I act, whatever it is. But the thing is like, I can't force you to do that. You have to make that choice. We have to trust in the Lord to do that. But so many people think that you can force it when you can't do that. You can't do it. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
And it's it just, I don't understand how the scriptures have been so just muddied and have become so misunderstood that people think that they, just because they're a pastor, they can just hit the nail, like, I can do this, I'm the head of the church, I can do this. Yes, you are the head of the church. You have a bigger burden to carry than someone who is just a regular attendee to the church. But at the same time, you're a human. You can only do so much.
Well, in my experience, and this might be a little deeper than our conversation today, but I think I've done enough internal work in, trauma from childhood, let's say, or, the family of origin stuff. And so I'm of the mind that these pastors in these roles doing this numbers driven ministry are often living out something that's internally backwards, right? Like, they never resolved that issue with dad, or they never worked through whatever, trauma happened in their childhood.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, they are on the stage, living out their issue, and they're trying to, prove to their dad or whatever in their past that they're great, and I'm a great pastor, and I lead teams, and I've got this large church. And so I think that's where it gets messy. And I think that a lot of it is subconscious. I don't think they're waking up every day trying to ruin the church. You know, they believe that they're doing what's right. And by firing a new youth pastor, we can get a new one in here, a fresh blood, and he'll maybe be able to do it. And you'd think after like 7 or 8 youth pastors, you know, in 14 years, you'd kind of be like, wait a second, maybe it's not the youth pastors. Maybe there's something culturally off here.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something we need to pull the mirror up and look in our face and see, hey, maybe we are leading these guys wrong. You know, maybe we're looking for the wrong type of guy.
Yeah, and I feel like a big thing that a lot of people don't understand is emotional intelligence and just the role that plays in being a
Yep.
pastor. There's so much value behind that people just don't understand. Like of course, you know, I say that and you're like, oh, you know, that kind of makes sense, but there's so much more to it. You know, you just have to be aware of your fellow person pretty much, just to sum it up.
Yeah, there's a great book by Peter Scazzaro, I'm butchering that last name, called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And that's a great read. If you haven't read it, I definitely encourage you to read it. But he's definitely speaking what you're saying right now. And I think he goes so far to say is you cannot be spiritually healthy if you're not emotionally healthy, that there is a correlation there and a symbiotic relationship that, you know, I mean, we see it in the extremes, right? If somebody's schizophrenic and they show up at your church and they're not doing anything to help their schizophrenia, their Christian walk is going to be severely limited and hampered because of that emotional stuff that's not being addressed. And so I think that's an extreme example, but between there and where most of us are at, there does need to be an internal journey, because I think the journey inward is the journey towards God. As we deal with that inner stuff, we start to see God showing up and healing those parts of us that were, you know, messed up somewhere along the way.
Yeah. Would you say the name of that book was?
It is Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Peter Scazzaro. I can send you the link if you want.
I think I found it. I just wanted to make sure that I found the right one.
Yeah. I think he might have 2 or 3 now that are kind of, you know, maybe versions of saying the same thing, but any one of those would be good.
Gotcha. So let me ask you this, because there's something that my professor really beat into us when I was at school. The theology behind ministry, the philosophy, and the methodology. What would be your theology of ministry, your philosophy, and your methodology?
So I've always been, and this goes back to those roots early on when I was 17, 18, and I was in Honduras on my first of 2 mission trips down there, and interacting with the kids. So we went down there, a group of probably 20 of us from the church, and we built in 10 days a church from the ground up. Literally, like, we go there, that's there is the foundation, and when we left, there was a church building. So in 10 days, that was pretty spectacular. Of course, we had some help there from, you know, the locals. But what I found unique for me is, you know, every day, I think it was like 1:00 in the afternoon, the local school right down the street in this little village would let out, and the kids would come down the street and they would be looking at us because we're these white people in the midst of a brown community. And they looked at us as if we were like, you know, something they haven't seen much of. Like, they're staring at us with their mouth open. And so anyways, we started playing games with them. We did duck, duck, goose. And, you know, we had a soccer ball and kicked it around. And so this happened every day, you know, throughout the 10 days. And by the last day, we counted like 90 something kids showed up because they started to see that this was a thing, and they would come and play with these, you know, white, you know, 18-year-olds in the town. And so that, for me, I remember flying back and journaling on the flight back. And I remember God kind of, again, turning something on in my heart, kind of beginning this journey of, you know, you can do what you did down there in the States, because it bothered me. The language barrier really bothered me. I didn't know Spanish. I mean, I had one of those silly little translator books. And so we would just throw out some random phrase to make kids laugh and such. But at the end of the day, it really bothered me because there was this huge barrier that I couldn't cross. I couldn't communicate directly to these kids what I wanted to communicate. And so I felt like on the way back, God just kind of nudged me and said, you know, you can have a similar experience here in the States, but you won't have the language barrier. And so that, coupled with this another chance meeting where somebody invited me to check out the middle school ministry, launched that whole path. And so, yeah, so getting back to that question, I used to say the word missional, but missional now has all this baggage attached to it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I've always since day one trained my volunteer leaders to see themselves as missionaries into the culture and the world of students. And so I think it's every year that passes. I mean, we're in 2020. Gosh, of all the years, look at this year. Everything's changing every 6 months. Like, we're in this rapidly changing world, and just the things that the kids are dealing with, the pressures on them, like everything is just flipping on this 6 to 8 month kind of schedule. And so for me, I feel like now more than ever, perhaps we need missionaries who are trained, who understand the world in which teens are growing up in, and how it's different than as adults to the teen level, you know, that their perspective and their pressures and struggles are different than the adults. And they're even different, far more different than what they grew up in. And so one of the things I hate that parents say, thankfully I haven't heard it in a long time, but I hate when parents say, oh, it's no different than when we were kids. We struggled with that, you know, fill in the blank, whatever they're struggling with.
Yeah.
And I'm like, listen, what you're talking about compared to today is massively different, right?
Yeah.
When a kid has a little 8-inch, 11-inch cell phone in their pocket, and they can watch HD videos, they can watch live news events happening around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And you grew up, without any of that. You'd watch the same channel every night that everybody else watched. That was your news source. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just the stuff that kids are, how they're being shaped with the cell phone, I think is still just only beginning to be studied and researched, and just the profound ways that that's affecting them negatively and positively. So that's kind of, a phrase that I always say is that, we don't ask students to walk into our world, we walk into theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And so that for me is, my philosophy of ministry. But the methodology, again, kind of what we're discussing, I mean, that's constantly changing. And it's one of those things that right now we're looking to reopen. We haven't been doing in person for middle school. And so we're looking to do that in the new year, starting in January. And so I've been leaning heavily into a few Facebook groups, a few of my friends who work at churches, and we're trying to find that balance. We're trying to find that messy middle of, we want kids to be safe. We want to protect them from, getting the virus or passing the virus. But we also see and acknowledge that, hey, we need to do something. Like, these kids have been through 9 months now of isolation and all the social stuff. They're not in sports. They're not in school. There is a huge negative that's being inflicted on these kids. And unfortunately, time rolls on. They're age-wise, physically, they're getting older, but they're not developing in the same way. And so we feel necessary to start something. And so I don't know, the methodology I've said multiple times in this new job is, I've done youth ministry for 20 years, but I've never done youth ministry in a pandemic. And so this is all new to me, and I'm trying to find that balance and, figure out what's the best way forward. And I think whatever we decide to do in January, we have to hold it open-handedly. We have to say, okay, we're going to do this for a few months. We don't know where the world's going to be. We don't know where this pandemic's going to be in 4 years. So please give us grace. It's an experiment. Walk with us and stay tuned, because things will probably look a little different. So that's hard for me as a 1 on the Enneagram. Again, being very structured. I like to have all my T's crossed, my I's dotted. But I think in this season, especially, I'm going to have to work really hard to stick with the mission and vision, but the methodology, how we bring Jesus to students, is going to have to be changing and, constantly looked at.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, no, I totally agree, because one of the things that I really liked you saying is your philosophy, how you say, you step into their world. That's exactly what Jesus did. Like, that's the best way to try and reach someone, is by going into their world.
right.
Like, if that wasn't the case, then why did God sent Jesus into our world where we are. He didn't try and necessarily change anything right then and there. It was he came in, and then over time, he tried to preach wisdom, and he tried to help us to see, the right way to live. And so it's one, a process, and two, we have to go there. We can't expect someone just out of the blue to come to us. Like, yeah, there's those very rare cases to where, someone was driving down the road and they're like, oh, I saw your sign, I wanted to come in. You have those cases. But a lot of the time, people aren't going to make the effort to, go to the church or, to even talk about God. So, we have to take that step as ministers. I mean, I shouldn't say we, excuse me. I'm not, in the church in terms of pastoral work at all. But, for example, you have to take that step to go into the world. And I feel like that's what a lot of people don't understand. And it's really sad. I see it as this. There's so many pastors, so many people in ministry that just miss the more simple concepts. They try and make it more complicated than what it needs to be, and they forget about the fact that you just have to preach Jesus. That's what it should boil down to. Of course, there are some people who do that very well, and there's a lot of steps that might need to be taken to get to that point. But I see so many churches nowadays that just forget the simple stuff. They forget the very basis of our faith, which is trust in Jesus. They forget that because they're so consumed with whatever it is. But to also touch on your point about just like the whole, cell phone thing and the whole social media thing, man, like I'm scared to see what's going to happen, especially in youth ministry, high school ministry, whatever it is, even in just the next like year, because of how advanced all of that's becoming. Porn is so easy to get a hold of now. You can have movies, you can have TV shows, you can have YouTube, literally any time of the day. It doesn't matter where you're at, you can access that stuff. And it's just a scary fact to know that like in your hand, you hold literally the knowledge to the entire world. At least everything that humans know, you can find on your phone. And so just the amount of fear that can bring and the amount of uncertainty that can bring, especially to someone who is young, someone who's in middle school, just kind of scares me. And I just don't know, like, I of course hope for the best because I want nothing more, than to, proclaim, there we go, the name of the Lord, and do what I can to better his kingdom on earth. But at the same respect, it's like, while I am trusting in him, it's also, like I live in today, and like it is a worrisome thing to figure out how I'm supposed to do that, especially when youth, even someone as, and this is going to sound awful, but as simple as the youth, it's hard to reach them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is definitely, as I alluded to earlier, it is a mission field. It's a challenging mission field. I'm often seeing and perplexed by the apathy. I think apathy more than sin is the struggle for today's youth, especially in America, that they're just apathetic. They're bored to death of Christianity. They go to school. They don't need any more education. They see religious stuff as education. They don't need another class to go to. And so I think that the technology again, and I'm a huge tech guy. I love technology. I swim in that stream myself. I've always got to have the latest and greatest phone. I'm always upgrading everything. So I can fall prey to that. And I also think that it reminds me of Ecclesiastes and Solomon, where it's like there are kids, especially at the high school level, who have already tired of swimming in that stream. They're wise enough to see how hollow and plastic things like TikTok are, right? Like these kids get on there and they do these 15-second, 30-second little bits of a song, the most catchiest part of a song, and they do their little dance and rip their shirt off or whatever. And that becomes like a thing for a day or maybe two, and then it's another song, and then it's a week, and then it's so I do find some hope in the reality that for some students it eventually is seen for what it is, which is very mechanical, very self-centered, very empty. It leaves you empty. And that's where I was going with Ecclesiastes. And Solomon is like, here's the richest guy in the world. At that time he had everything. He was the Jeff Bezos, living on the, DoorDash showed up with every meal. I mean, he was living high and mighty. And what did he end up saying? Everything, it's all meaningless. Like all of these things, the women, the, whatever you chase after, if it's not God, ends up becoming meaningless, pointless, not fulfilling. And so I'm encouraged that I think some teens, the more that's being thrown at them, it's almost like it can have the opposite effect, right? It's like they see all these things like, oh, now another app, another thing that I have to get, it's the activism stuff too. It's like, I appreciate and I love the passion that we see in the youth whenever there's some social injustice or there's something around the world or whatever. I love that they're passionate about it, but the caveat is what I'm leaning into, which is it's so short-lived, right? Like last month's activism is gone this month. Like they rarely stick with whatever the thing is. And partly because the world is so interconnected now that the next month there's another huge thing that happens. The other side of the world has a typhoon, or the Olympics get canceled, or so-and-so has something happen. It's just a crazy world to be growing up in. And so I try to lean into, it's hard at times, but I try to lean into the hope that we may not be able to get the hundreds and hundreds of kids that, we used to get into church. But if we take the mindset of bringing church to where they're at, so instead of the goal being getting kids into my youth group, it's about me getting into the high school, me training leaders to go love on them wherever they're at. I think that's the way forward. I think the church has to be more about sending people out than bringing people in, especially going forward.
Yeah, I can totally agree with you. I want to ask this question though. What do you think is a common misconception that most people might think about pastors?
Let me think. I kind of alluded to it earlier, but I think it's just the pedestal thing. I think the worst thing you can do is put your pastor on a pedestal. I did a podcast episode recently where I talked about Christian celebrities, and I connected. It was a blog I read years back. I think it was in college, actually, that far back. But this guy was talking about how celebrities today, and I would include Christian celebrities, so pastors who become like known nationally, or they have their huge Instagram following, that they are today's Greek and Roman gods. That you go back in history and it's like, why did they make up these stories, these myths about Zeus and Apollo and all these different gods, if you will? And it's very similar to celebrities in that we love raising people up. We love making them on this higher level. And we do that for two reasons. One, because sometimes we like the escape. If you see your life as lowly or your life sucks and you're not enjoying life, you kind of escape to look up to this God, lowercase g, or you look up to this celebrity and you think, oh, if my life looked like that, if I lived in that home, or if I lived in Southern California, like if I was like them, then my life would be better, right? So we kind of escape through the God, or we escape through the celebrity. And so I think that's one reaction. The other one is that we genuinely strive to be like them, so they become examples for us. So we try to emulate our God, or the qualities in that God, or we try to emulate that celebrity. We dress like them, we say the phrases that they say. We genuinely try to become better people. The problem with celebrities and lowercase gods is that they are imperfect and they're human. And so that means that inevitably they will fail. They will break the mold and the image and the pedestal that you raise them up on. And isn't it odd? Isn't it ironic that when celebrities fail publicly, we also kind of enjoy watching that, right? Like we get out the popcorn and we love hearing about some tape that's revealed, or some secret recording or whatever, or they said this back when whatever. Like we like to watch them fall from grace. We like to watch and hear the stories, even unfortunately, of pastors, I think most recently Carl Lentz, I don't know if you follow him or were a
Mm-mm.
part of that, but he had an affair and Hillsong Church fired him. And it was a big thing because of his renown. He's a big known guy. He's spoken at lots of big conferences and he's written books and he's a very known public figure. And so that would just be what I would say. And to me, it's a duh statement, but I think unfortunately for a lot of people, it's not, which is pastors are people, pastors are human. And I think the
Mm-hmm.
more that we raise them up to this level that they don't even want to be put at, it's a rare pastor that I have interacted with that wants to be put on this level of like, I'm Superman. I don't have any struggles. I don't have any junk in my trunk.
Mm-hmm.
I think that 50 years ago, that was a good, how do you say, image for pastor, like the Superman or woman that you strive to be like your pastor. He wore a robe and he lived a certain kind of life.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in today's day and age, people relate far more to our weaknesses than they do our strength. Like when I get up there and I say, I love doing these things, I'm really good at this. I don't think people relate to that as much as when I say, I really struggle with fill in the blank, or I'm not really good at. So I think that is definitely my advice, is to not put pastors on pedestals. They're real people. Most of them are striving to, do the best they can, and imperfectly they're trying to move the ball forward just like you are in whatever job you have or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
situation in life you find yourself in.
Mm. That's good. Um, so I'd like to ask you one more question. And this question, your answer could be exactly what you just said. But I like to ask everyone that comes on this podcast, what would be like a piece of advice that you would want to give to someone? So it could be anything like a saying, or it could be, like a song or something that you held on to, since you were a kid. But what would be, that like one thing that, you feel like you've just held on to your whole life, or even something that's maybe just recent?
Yeah, so this I kind of went through a Rolodex of a few different things and this one popped back up, so I'm going to go with it, but
All right.
it's a quote. So it's kind of like I'll even kind of say it in a spiritual way of like maybe this is a benediction, something to speak through to your listeners.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a quote from Phillips Brooks, and he says this. He says, "Do not pray for easy lives. Pray to be stronger men. Do not pray for tasks equal to your powers. Pray for powers equal to your tasks. Then the doing of your work shall be no miracle, but you yourself shall be a miracle. Every day you shall wonder at yourself, at the richness of life, which has come to you by the grace of God." So that's always been part of my journey, and I think that's I like most people, I think, fall into that constant prayer trap, which is, God, just give me an easier life. Eliminate this obstacle, eliminate this tough person that I have to work with, or this crazy mom, or whatever is in my way at an easy life.
Mm-hmm.
And we can just get into this kind of relationship with God again of like, he's a vending machine. Just give me what I need, God, to live my life. And I just like that this Brooks guy says, no, don't pray that way.
Mm-hmm.
Pray to be stronger. If God's giving you all these obstacles and there's legitimately tough things in your life, then pray that you can be strong enough to face them. Pray that you change instead of your circumstances change.
Mm-hmm.
Pray that God changes you in the midst of those circumstances. So that
Mm-hmm.
would be my benediction, my hope for whoever's listening, that you would be that kind of person that's open to God changing you, because in changing you, that's how, guess what, these other things have the more likely chance of them changing, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we change, the people around us change, our work changes, our life changes. So that's what I got.
Yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. Um, and I don't want to add on to that. I have a bad habit of adding on to what people say, so I'll just say this, that like it's good stuff. People need to be more open. I'll say that.
For sure.
So real quick, Kurt, do you want to give a little thing about your podcast? Just kind of self promote a little bit, if you will.
Yeah, 100%. I would love for any of your listeners who enjoyed our conversation today to come over and check out my podcast, which is called the Cultured Christian Podcast. You can find it pretty much anywhere that podcasts are out. And our whole thing over there is we like to say that we pop the Christian bubble, and we're just a group of people that we love culture, we love technology, and we love faith. We're Christian men and women who like to talk about those three things. And a lot of our listeners are not attending church or kind of have, been frustrated with the church in the past. And so they consider themselves Christians, but they're into things like yoga and smoking a cigar, or having, a glass of bourbon, or going to some movie or some show, theater event or something. So that's kind of our shtick. So if you're into culture, technology, and faith, come on and check us out. We just dropped episode 23 last week. So
nice.
We're moving forward.
Yeah, nice. So after we hang up, go ahead and link me everything that you want me to put in the notes for this. So then people can find you, or, Twitter or whatever it is, just all the links and stuff, so then people can find you. And then I'd also like to say this: if you ever find yourself needing a host or something like that, or not a host, a guest, and you want me on, I'd be more than happy to, pop on, say a few things, or, do an episode with you. If you need that, I like to offer my services since you took your time to come on my episode, my podcast. So yeah, that's that. Be sure to send me an email again with everything that you want me to link, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel. This has been fun. I came in, I didn't say it earlier, but I came in completely blind, in the sense that I liked your approach of, doing the interview the way that you did. And
Thanks.
So I haven't listened to a single episode of your podcast. So I don't know anything. I didn't know your style. I didn't know what kind of conversations you've had. So
yeah,
I'm excited now to kind of go back and backlog and check out your podcast.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I've spoken to, just to give you a little bit of a history of this. I've been doing it for like 3 or 4 months, something like that. But I've spoken with people from the video, well, I shouldn't say the video game field. I've spoken with people who want to go into game design. I've spoken with people who have physical and mental disabilities. I've spoken with people who, have come out as trans. I spoke with people who identify as homosexuals. I've spoken to so many different people, and the range of people is just astronomical. I have people that are scheduled from China to speak with. It's so cool to all these different people I've spoken with. Just the amount of banter that we can have, and the conversations, and just like the topics and everything. It's been very, very cool just to see these people that I never knew existed. So
that's cool.
Yeah. I mean, if you enjoyed this, and you feel like, hold on, let me look. Let me give you. This is gonna sound awful, but let me give you one that I think you might enjoy very much. I will say this: I really enjoyed the conversation that I had with Haley, which is one of my earlier episodes, and then one of the conversations that I had with Isaac. I liked Isaac's conversation as well. So if you want to take a listen to any of my past episodes, I would suggest those, just because I feel like they help encapsulate what I'm trying to do in this podcast, which is just try to understand people. So
sweet.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on here, Kurt. I really had a good time. I hope you have a great week, and I hope that, everything with your youth ministry and everything is blessed, and that hopefully you guys can meet again soon, since I know that, COVID sucks and all. So
that's an understatement.
Yeah, it's been something. 2020's
awesome,
been a year.
Dude. Thanks so much.
Yeah, have a good night.
Have fun with Destiny.
Oh, thanks, man. I will.
Yeah.
Later. Kurt's a good guy, dude. Very knowledgeable, very intelligent, very kind person, very kind soul. We need more people like Kurt. A guy who's just, one, he's open. He's okay with talking about some stuff that might not have been the best. But at the same time, you know, like, he's not going to let that crap, you know, put him down. He's killing it. I wish nothing but the best for your ministry. And here's the thing, you know, if you made it this far and you're like, dude, why in the world do they talk about religion and Christianity for the last hour? Here's the thing. One, I podcast. I like talking about this stuff. Two, you know, it's just a conversation that we're having. That's a beauty about this podcast, is that we can have a conversation about whatever it is. You know, and no, we're not trying to impose anything. No, we're not trying to say, you know, you have to do this, you have to do that. Like I said, you know, we can only do so much. Like, you know, it's God's choice and it's your choice. So anyway, hope you have a good one, Kurt. You know, good luck with your ministry and everything. Really hope that, you know, it's blessed. You know, keep doing what you're doing. It does not go unnoticed. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Across the Pond. If you enjoyed this episode a lot, please check out some of my other episodes. I've had some great conversations with a ton of people on a variety of subjects. If you know of a friend or a family member, or even maybe that one person that's not really part of your family, but they are, like that uncle, and you think that they would like an episode, please share it with them. I want to thank Mark for the logo, and I want to thank the Black Couch label and Ollie H for the music, and I want to thank you, the listener, for giving this about an hour and a half of your time. I really do appreciate it. I want to ask one more thing of you. If you can, on whatever platform you're listening on, please leave a rating. I have episodes that come out every Sunday and every other Thursday. Tune in next time for another awesome episode of Across the Pond.